When morning came, all the chief priests and the elders of the people conferred together against Jesus in order to bring about his death. They bound him, led him away, and handed him over to Pilate the governor. When Judas, his betrayer, saw that Jesus was condemned, he repented and brought back the 30 pieces of silver to the chief priests and the elders. He said, "I have sinned by betraying innocent blood." But they said, "What is that to us? See to yourself." Throwing down the pieces of silver in the temple, he departed, and he went and hanged himself. But the chief priest, taking the pieces of silver, said, "It is not lawful to put them into the treasury, since they are blood money." After conferring together, they used them to buy the potter's field as a place to bury foreigners. For this reason, that field has been called the field of blood to this day. Then was fulfilled what had been spoken through the prophet Jeremiah. And they took the 30 pieces of silver, the price of the one on whom a price has been set, on whom some of the people of Israel had set a price, and they gave them for the potter's field, as the Lord commanded me. Now Jesus stood before the governor, and the governor asked him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" Jesus said, "You say so." But when he was accused by the chief priests and the elders, he did not answer. Then Pilate said to him, "Do you not hear how many accusations they make against you?" But he gave him no answer, not even to a single charge, so that the governor was greatly amazed. Now, at the festival, the governor was accustomed to release a prisoner for the crowd, anyone whom they wanted. At that time, they had a notorious prisoner called Jesus Barabbas. So, after they had gathered, Pilate said to them, "Whom do you want me to release for you? Jesus Barabbas, or Jesus who is called the Messiah?" For he realized that it was out of jealousy that they had handed him over. While he was sitting on the judgment seat, his wife sent word to him, "Have nothing to do with that innocent man, for today I have suffered a great deal because of a dream about him." Now the chief priests and the elders persuaded the crowds to ask for Barabbas and to have Jesus killed. The governor again said to them, "Which of the two do you want me to release for you?" And they said, "Barabbas." Pilate said to them, "Then what should I do with Jesus, who is called the Messiah?" All of them said, "Let him be crucified." Then he asked, "Why? What evil he has done?" But they shouted all the more, "Let him be crucified." So when Pilate saw that he could do nothing, but rather that a riot was beginning, he took some water and washed his hands before the crowd, saying, I'm innocent of this man's blood. See to it yourselves." Then the people, as a whole, answered, "His blood on us and on our children. His blood be on us and on our children." So he released Barabbas for them, and after flogging Jesus, he handed him over to be crucified. Welcome to this video, to this channel. This is Giampaolo. I'm an Anglican deacon in the Old Catholic tradition, and in these videos we are trying to analyze the Passion of Jesus according to the Matthew's Gospel, and in particular we are analyzing the chapters 26 and 27. And first of all, I would like to say some words about Judas' suicide. As we have seen, Judas soon realized that he had fallen into a trap. The condemnation of Jesus had already been decided, and the Sanhedrin had used him. In turn, the high priest and the Sanhedrin were slaves to the mechanism of Roman domination and power. We will see that. We are trying to analyze this point later on. But we may say even now that even Judas was a sort of victim of the established political power system. The Gospel, we see, have a very bad opinion of Judas. In the Gospel, Judas is a sort of the bad guy. But as we already faced in previous videos, recent studies show that Judas probably did not intend to betray Jesus, in the sense that he didn't want the Jesus' death. He probably did not understand that Jesus was Messiah in a different way, in a spiritual and not in a material sense. Indeed, we have seen even today that Judas openly says, I have sinned, and he speaks about, I have betrayed innocent blood. So perhaps Judas repented, but he didn't have the courage to turn to God. He felt probably so crushed by the sin to the point of taking his own life. So once upon a time, suicide was thought to always condemn to the eternal death. In any case, now, maybe thanks also to more recent psychological studies, we cannot say that. We consider in a different way the suicide. Well, of course, the suicide itself is condemned, but we cannot say for anybody that is damned and damned forever. And this is also valid for Judas. Why? Because we don't know if at the very last time, at the very last second, maybe the person itself repented, or we don't know how much this person was lucid to do this act, how much he was desperate, and did not do it against God with this intention to refuse his life. And the same is for Judas. So we cannot say that Judas is damned forever. Then there is the fact, the mention of the prophecy according to Jeremiah. And you know that especially in Matthew, that is a gospel addressed for a Judaic Christian community, it is important that everything that is happening is in line with the prophecies, is in line with the Old Testament. Why? Because he wants to reaffirm, to confirm that there was a divine plan here, to reaffirm that it was not by occasion, by accident that this happened, but there is a meaning, a spiritual meaning that we have seen. we can see. Unfortunately, here the reference is to Matthew has a reference to Jeremiah, but in reality the prophecy is found in Zechariah, chapter 11, verses 12 and 13. So why we have this difference? Because we have to think that at the time the book of prophets were collected all together, and it started exactly with the book of Jeremiah. That's why all references were done based on Jeremiah, which was the first book of all prophets. Then, proceeding, then we have this comparison between Jesus and Pilate. We may entitle this video as the two kings and the two Jesus. First of all, let's see the two kings. Who was Pontius Pilate? Pontius Pilate at the time was the procurator of Judea. Before having a procurator, a governor, Judea was ruled by a Jewish king who was subject to Rome, of course, but Rome had subsequently preferred to have a person directly linked to the empire, more directly linked to the empire, and therefore a procurator. Pontius Pilate was governor or procurator of Judea from 26 to 36 after Christ. So, this is also testified by Joseph Flavio, and he also testified that Pilate was very cruel. He held on to power by killing anyone who opposed it unscrupulously. The Sanhedrin, therefore, had Jesus brought to Pontius Pilate, as the Sanhedrin itself had no power to life or death. This was exclusively in the hands of the Romans. So the accusation which Jesus was presented to Pontius Pilate was that Jesus claimed to be the king of the Jews. And usually we think that it was a sort of misunderstanding, but we have to exclude it. The Messiah, according to Judaism, was necessarily a royal figure, a descendant of the King David. This is precisely the first question that Pilate asked him. Are you king of the Jews? The affirmation done by Jesus at this point, he says, you say it, is a confirmation. It's not to say, as I've heard, to say it's your words, not mine. No, Jesus is confirming that. Even if in the mind of Jesus, the idea of king was completely different from the idea of king that was in the mind of Pilate. So here, Pilate was in front not only to the risk of a possible revolt, but also to an injured majesty. And indeed, this was the reason for the sentence placed on the cross, what is called the titulus, that was Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews. That was the way to make people know about the reason for the condemnation. By making himself king over the Jews, Jesus effectively opposed to the emperor, who was politically the only one Lord. Although Jesus, as I said, did not consider himself as an earthly king. Nevertheless, the kingship of Jesus and the lordship questioned the emperor's lordship. There is another power that is counterposed against the power of the emperor and against Pilate. So here, in real, we have a king against another king. Jesus is not particularly talkative. Even in his cruelty, Pilate finds evident difficulties in condemning Jesus based only on the accusation of the Sanhedrin and on a generic confirmation by Jesus himself, but without any other proof. Nevertheless, he cannot underestimate the fact that the Sanhedrin itself had given it to him. So that's why Pilate seeks a way out by appealing to a custom invoked during the Easter period, that is, to free a prisoner, leaving the decision to the people. Perhaps it was precisely this act that was considered by the Ethiopian church an attempt by Pilate to save Jesus, and for this reason Pilate is even venerated by them as a saint. This custom was celebrated by the Romans precisely during the Easter period because Easter was the feast of liberation, and in this way the Romans wanted to ingratiate themselves with the Jewish people. Pilate therefore presents two condemned to the people, Jesus and Barabbas, whom many scholars identify with a zealot leader, that is, a rebel fighter. Now, according to many manuscripts of Matthew's Gospel, the full name we have also seen in our translation is not only Barabbas, but Jesus Barabbas. So the parallel between the two convicts becomes truly impressive. Paradoxically, the roles are exchanged. Jesus is presented with a dominant political role. Indeed, Christ, the term Christ, precisely, means Messiah. That means king. On the contrary, Jesus Barabbas, a violent rebel, is presented with a spiritual role. Indeed, in Aramaic, the word Barabba is split in two words, Bar and Abba. And Bar means son, Abba means father, so together means son of the father. So it sounds like this: who do you want to free? Jesus, that is called the king, or Jesus, that is called the son of the father, which is really impressive. Here we see that Barabbas can be thought as the first freed by Jesus. Jesus replaces Barabbas' condemnation, which is very evocative. Now, we have this very strong sentence. All people cry, we want Jesus to be crucified. And also a terrible phrase, his blood falls on us and on our children. That means forever. This sentence was understood and was a sort of confirmation by the Christians, the Jewish people, that the Hebrews condemned Jesus. And this led the Christians to consider very badly the Hebrews, which is really very wrong. Wrong also because this sentence here is not to be interpreted as an admission of guilt by Judaism. We have to understand this based on the traditional biblical expression. To condemn a crime or a dangerous person, taking responsibility for it. So, for example, in the second book of Samuel, we see David cried to him, "Your blood falls on your head. Testify against you your mouth which said, and killed the consecrated one of the Lord." So we can see that it is not to be intended as a perennial course of the Jewish people, but a confirmation, simple confirmation of the assumption of responsibility in this choice made between Jesus and Barabbas. A choice to which not the Jewish people, the whole people, but 10 or maybe hundreds only of people that were presented in Praetorium had been called to act in front of Pilate. So it's absolutely historical false to think that all Jews wanted Jesus' death. First of all, because Jesus was condemned only by the Sanhedrin, and even not the whole Sanhedrin. For example, Joseph of Arimathea and Nicodemus, which were authoritative members of the Sanhedrin, were on the side of Jesus. And even because, as we have seen, only a few hundred of people could be in the square in front of Pilate. So we have to reject the idea that Jesus was condemned by the whole people of Jews. So the question that I would like to face is who or what killed Jesus? Who is responsible for that? And we have to see what I call the political reasons of the condemnation of Jesus. And contrary to what is commonly thought, the Sanhedrin was not a religious organ, but a political one that collaborated with the Roman power to control the situation. In fact, in order to effectively dominate, the Romans had to nip all revolts in the bud, without worrying about differences between political dissidents and religious dissidents. That is, they were not concerned with motivations that could be political, religious, but with the dissidents itself. Anyway, Pontius Pilate could not achieve his control without a trusted and skilled Jewish counterpart. From the time of Herod, the high priest was appointed directly from Rome. And even the high priest could not have carried out his task of control and collaboration with the Romans without help, and this help was the Sanhedrin. The Judaism historian Ellis Rifkin states that the Sanhedrin is an institution named and convened by a religious illegitimate subject, the high priest. The Sanhedrin had no authority over religious matters. According to the historian expert in the history of Judaism, Ellis Rifkin, even John the Baptist was killed for political reasons. Because we have to think that at the time, not only the people who could organize a riot were in risk to be killed, but every charismatic person. And Jesus was certainly a charismatic person. Even we may think him as a charismatic of the charismatics, healing the sick, driving out demons, resurrecting the dead, stirring hope in the coming of the kingdom of God. It matters little if Jesus meant it in a spiritual sense. The expression kingdom of God or kingdom of heaven was commonly understood with the political and social kingdom, certainly opposed to the Roman rule. And for this reason, it was considered very dangerous. He moved a lot of people, and people together could be easily piloted. Maybe not by Jesus, but some other people. So Jesus had to die. Jesus was not brought before a religious court. He was not brought before the Bedim Boulay of the Pharisee. If Jesus had been brought before a religious tribunal, he would have been punished, maybe flogged, but Jesus was brought before a political tribunal, which was the Sanhedrin. And the Sanhedrin, however, although acting as a political organ, didn't have the authority to act criminally against Jesus. That's why Jesus is led by the Roman procurator, the Roman governor, Pontius Pilate. So we have these three elements. Pontius Pilate, the governor, the high priest, and the Sanhedrin. And all of them had the mission to take control about the situation. The high priest and the Sanhedrin were collaborators of the Romans in this objective. And if they wanted to keep their power, and from the Jewish point of view, if they wanted to keep a minimal level of freedom, they had to collaborate with Romans for the taxes, for the control of the situation, to avoid any violent revolt. That's why Jesus was politically dangerous. And that's why Jesus was truly condemned as the King of the Jews. So at the end, as you can see, it no longer makes sense to ask who crucified Jesus. The question is no longer whether those responsible were the Jews or the Romans. The question shifts from who to what. The Roman imperial system was in fact guilty. The Sadducees, the Pharisees, the Essenes did not push anyone towards a violent revolt. They did not prepare any terrain that could generate dangerous rioters or dangerous charismatics. But the Roman imperial system of domination and control was the real culprit for a mechanism that proved in human. So, what can we understand from this point of view? We may receive from the Gospel according to Matthew the seventh key that I could call the kingdom of heaven. The Hellenistic area also knew a political use of the term Lord, the one for which Kyrios Caesar is shouted Caesar is the Lord. Here the emperor is made a sort of a sign of religious hopes of salvation in an idolatrous drift that has never escaped Jewish sensitivity and was immediately recognized as a king rejected also by the Christian ones. So by confessing Jesus as Christ, Messiah or King, Lord, the Christian community brings back every other king, every other emperor as a human among humans, to whom no worship should be given. The Christian confession of Jesus as Christ demythologizes and breaks down oppressive political structures and creates real spaces of freedom as a possibility of service. Thus, what we could call a Kyriarchal ideology is emptied by manifesting the decline of the lords of before in the light of the one who reigns, taking the form of a servant, as said by St. Paul in his Philippian letters to the Philippians, chapter 2, verse 7. No worship is allowed for the emperor. The kingship of the emperor is desacralized. The emperor has no absolute power, no more. Indeed, his power is questioned by another power, that of God himself, who recognizes himself king in Jesus Christ. A king that is different from the other kings. A king that is on the side of the last. A king who turns the pyramid upside down. A king who engages social relations on equality, who replaces domination with service and compassion. A subversive king could not fail to be perceived as dangerous for political authority. Yes, it was not a misunderstanding. Jesus really dies out of lèse-majesty, dies to inaugurate a new idea of power. The way of salvation is a way in a new kingdom, the kingdom of God, or as Matthew calls it, the kingdom of heaven. That is an otherworldly dimension, a transcendental dimension that lives not only in our mind or on a personal level, but places us to worship only one Lord, demythologizing every other lordship, every other social power, be it political or religious power. From now on, power is only the power of compassion, only the power of service, and never again the power of domination. Amen.